But something else I'm looking for here. Here it is. I'll get to it in just a minute. Anyway, go ahead, Michael. You made some very good points there. And by the way, all of this Talmudism, many Jews say they don't know about the Talmud. They weren't taught about these incredibly arrogant and genocidal views, that they know nothing about it, really, that it's all old history. Others on the Internet, of course, try to rewrite the Talmudic quotations in a much more sanguine fashion to make them seem superfluous, and they claim people have misinterpreted them from the old language. Not true. There are too many accurate and scholarly definitive translations around. Please go ahead.
Well, before I get into that, I just wanted to mention you brought up the president of Iran and the attribution to him, which, as you say, is erroneous, that he wanted to wipe the state of the Israeli out of existence. But again, this is notorious, like Farrakhan's statement. How many people know that the Israeli deputy defense minister, as recently as February 29th, 2008, said that there should be a Holocaust of Palestinians in Gaza? That was Matan Vilnai. He said they should be Shoah, S-H-O-A-H. And as Steve Erlinger points out, the Hebrew word Shoah means catastrophe or Holocaust, and is rarely used for anything other than extermination.
He knew what was coming, it sounds like to me.
He knew what he was coming. He makes the statement, but you see, this is how the Israelis are protected from the consequences of their exterminating racism by the Western media, even as their critics, like Farrakhan, are eternally stigmatized. Now, as far as the Talmud being little known among Judaics, it depends on what population, what ethnicity, what geographical area you're talking about. In the United States, the majority of Judaics identify with a liberal version called Reform Judaism, and it's true, it largely is not literate in the Talmudic text. However, like Zionism, it has inherited through a process of osmosis as the cultural patrimony of the Talmud itself. It has inherited the racism and the ethnocentricity, and if it didn't, then we wouldn't see Congress being controlled in the way it is and advocating war against the Palestinians. But nonetheless, it's quite true that the majority of American Judaics do not have a close familiarity with the Talmud. However, at the same time, many of these people are very proud of the Talmud. They're proud of their heritage, and even if they have a foggy notion of it, at the same time they say that it is a part of the tradition of their persecuted ancestors, and therefore it's worth preserving. So they have kind of a extra cerebral nostalgia for the Talmud. Now, in the Israeli state, where Orthodox Judaism has enormously more power and position as opposed to its role here in the United States, where, as I said, Reform Judaism has far more adherents. Although that's changing as liberal Judaics contracept themselves out of existence and Orthodox Judaic populations continue to grow.
That's a very important point, Michael. Yeah.
I'd also like to briefly address the idea of Judaics against Zionism. I think that where people are secular Judaics, where they are not attached to the Talmud or adherents of Orthodox Judaism, then I think that can be sincere. However, when you have groups like the Neturei Karta and other Talmudic followers who claim to be opposed to the Israeli project for world supremacy, then I think this is where people are really being beguiled, because they're not understanding the earlier and older model of Talmudic conquest. We have to go all the way back to Bar Kokhba and his failed revolt. Originally, the Judaics, and at that time they were not, as I call them, Judaics today, because that's my way of signaling that they're counterfeit Jews, and not the vast majority of them are not actually today descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whereas, of course, in the first century they were. And so the Jews of that era tried violence, and they tried violent resistance, and they were so thoroughly crushed in the Bar Kokhba revolt that if you read the rabbinic text, you will see that they decided to advance their cause through stealth, through guile, and through projecting these decoy texts in the Talmud, which you made reference to. There are humanitarian texts there, and there are nice brotherhood-sounding texts, but there are also hermeneutic excursuses which indicate to those who are initiated into the rabbinic textual exegesis that these are decoy texts put there for the benefit and the consumption of the goyim. And if we're good fruit inspectors, we'll find out that the fruits of the Talmud are bad and they're racist, so that sort of undercuts at a very initial level the fact that these are just superficial texts that were placed there for the benefit of the goyim. But in terms of this competition between two differing interpretations, the Nutare Karta and other Talmudic Judaics like them represent the old school, that Bar Kokhba it was crushed by a Gentile military power as represented by Rome, and so it's not really sanguine for us to proceed along the Bar Kokhba model. But once Zionism and then religious Zionism, Talmudic Zionism emerged, as I mentioned with Rabbi Kook and other theoreticians in the 20th century, it was decided that we had entered the era where Judaism could use violence to advance its cause. So we're talking about a difference in tactics, but the overall contempt for the Gentiles and the belief that Gentiles do not have a soul that is equivalent to Judaics, which is the root of all of these problems.
When we come back, Michael, I want to talk about this elitism, this arrogance, this chosen people attitude and ethos that permeates far too much of this planet in terms of its Jewish population.
They have the Neshama Ha'elona. Yes, I'd be glad to talk about that.
In just a minute with Michael Hoffman. Okay, and we're back with Michael Hoffman. I urge you to get a copy of his book. It is truly a monumental work. As many of you know, the effort by organized Zionism to force Jews to Israel was rather ruthless, to put it mildly. Jews living in surrounding Arab nations were not attacked by Arabs at all. The Mossad went in and attacked Jews, killed many of them, forced them to move to Israel. In fact, this kind of pressure still exists today. It's a very complicated issue. But above and beyond all of that is this unbelievable, ungodly arrogance that these people, and I'm not talking about many of you Jews out there who are absolutely opposed to this as we are. I'm talking about people who on this planet think that their worth as human beings absolutely subjugates that of any other living life form, that they are it. And other life, Goyim, in fact, is essentially just a servant class. It's like a caste system in India, but even worse than that. Go ahead, Michael, please.
Yes, well, what you're really talking about is the Neshama Ha'elona, which is the soul of a fully human being, and according to the rabbinic text, only a Jew would possess that status. So the rest of us are lacking this nephesh status. And that's why we can be killed. That's why Christians under Bolshevism and Palestinian and Lebanese Arabs under the Israeli military, those who have been labeled in this way, they can be killed. Let's go over to the Babylonian Talmud at Bava Metzia 114b. Only you, the members of the Jewish people, are called men, but non-Jews are not called men. Now, the ADL and some of these other hysterical apologist groups will say that that's a made-up quote or it's taken out of context. I reproduced the original Aramaic on page 470 of my book for that quotation. We have dozens of others which give credence to this and document the fact that there is a huge disparity. You know, Jeff, The test of any law is the principle of universality. It's the feature of any law code worth anything, and that is whether we apply to ourselves what we apply to others. And the great defect of Orthodox Judaism and all of its tributaries, which are offshoots of it, Zionism and these other ideologies, is that they don't do this. They have one law for the elite themselves and another law for the rest of us. And that's at the root of what we see happening in Gaza, because otherwise it's almost unexplainable, the contemptuous disregard and dismissal of, as you say, it's not a war, it's a massacre, and this disregard for it in the West. Now, in the Third World, of course, it's a burning issue, and Al Jazeera and other independent media outlets have done a pretty good job of bringing this to the attention of the public. For Westerners, it's not an issue.